thank you for joining me for this very special virtual event. It's the Talent Unlimited Virtual Recognition Ceremony. My name is Jenn Kocsmiersky and I'm an artist and illustrator and this year's speaker for this year's event. Since the live event was canceled, here I am at my home to present the journal and all the outstanding artwork that was chosen for this year. I'm really impressed with the Talent Unlimited program. Congratulations to the artists whose work appears in this journal. I really enjoyed seeing the different ways each artist dealt with the theme of rock and roll. Just really impressed with the remarkable range of styles and subject matter. Thank you for making and sharing your art. The journal itself is so outstanding, so for the slideshow I sort of kept the same sequence. Lastly, just a quick note, my speech has gone through a lot of iterations and revisions and has had to adapt to kind of the changing times. Rather than like a speech, I sort of made it into like a story. So I'm going to tell a little story. There's a little history background in the beginning, but I promise it's relevant. Thank you again, I hope you enjoy. In the year 1950 to 1953, the countries of North Korea and South Korea were at war. The United States played a major role in the war. The fighting eventually ceased, although there was no official ceasefire, and the country remained divided. In the aftermath, hundreds of thousands of civilians had been killed and many more were injured or had disappeared. Parents lost children, children lost parents. Families were further separated when a border was drawn at the 38th parallel, known as the DMZ. In response to the devastating aftermath, South Korea opened its borders to international adoption, while the United States legalized the process of becoming a naturalized citizen. About a decade later, the Civil Rights Movement had erupted in America. Yet another immigration act passed in an effort to remove systemic discrimination against non-white prospective citizens. And since its passage in 1954, South Korea's international adoption program had become the largest in the world, and America had become the leading destination. On April 12, 1980, a 2-year-old girl and her courier deplaned at Kennedy Airport. They had just flown from Seoul to Los Angeles to New York City. There, she was met by her mother, father, and 2 older brothers. The newly extended Kocsmiersky family piled into a wood-paneled station wagon and made the long ride home to a small seaside town called Hampton, New Hampshire. The girl was loved and cared for, fussed over, and cooed at, like an always new novelty. The girl grew up watching public television heroes like Bob Ross and Jim Henson. The Muppets were enchanting and funny, but the girl was even more fascinated by the mystery and artistry of puppetry itself. Beyond the performance, she wanted to see how the puppets worked, how the puppeteers hid behind sets, how the camera panned over an unseen floor. She wondered, how big are the puppets in real life? And did the felt skin never get pilly, like her sweaters? She began to love any kind of art that did not disguise the creative process, but instead allowed it to be part of the performance. She loved Mr. Rogers' Picture because it showed a film about how crayons were made. She revered cooking shows with Julia Child and Martin Yan for dispatching omelets and spicy beans without mystery or pretension. She rode her tricycle, climbed trees and stone walls, went to the beach, and pulled around her little sister in a wooden wagon. As best as she could tell, it was an idyllic New England childhood. As she got older, things began to change. The girl started having complicated, confusing emotions and experiences, all having to do with a brewing sense of injustice that she could not quite pinpoint. It began when others would ask withering questions that undermined the authenticity of her family. It continued with backhanded compliments like good stereotype and model minority. And it escalated to a comprehensive fog comprised of verbal punches, slurs, and even outright discrimination. Strangely, she would experience these injustices as if she were a third party spectator, as if she were another person watching herself, incredulous of the entitlement others felt in defining someone they didn't even know. Despite its fascinating ability to lay bare the inner workings of implicit bias, the girl was getting wary of having feelings as if her personhood and identity was always up for debate, ever changing in dimension, and continually at stake. The trouble was that when she complained or exposed the injustice's true nature, racism, bigotry, discrimination, she was ignored. No one seemed to have any interest in seeing the injustice as she saw it. Some even claimed that there was no injustice, that the problem she complained about was invisible, non-existent, well removed from modern day society. This was a bewildering response. The girl had expected gasps of wonder and amazement when she pulled back the curtain to reveal a behind the scenes look at what was really going on. She had expected praise for her bravery and spunk, and solemn promises from all to do better in being critical of this injustice in the future. But no, this did not happen. Instead, she was seen as noisy, argumentative, difficult, and just unnecessarily angry. Perhaps it was she who was the problem. She was running out of places and people to whom she could retreat and find reassurance. Even in her all-white family, understanding of the injustice was hard to come by. Not even her parents knew exactly how to reaffirm her identity or legitimize her anger, sadness, frustration, and disgust. Her family did not know how to warn her that she would be treated differently in the world outside the love and safety of her home, because they never experienced racial injustice themselves. The girl struggled to make sense of all the confusion, but things kept clashing in confusing ways. She heard the term orphaned refugee, but this term was in stark contrast to her many sun-dappled memories of childhood or the way she had internalized her adoption as a comforting bedtime story. The girl had no memory of being in the orphanage, of her birth family or birth country, and yet she was expected to remember and miss those places and people and grieve for their loss. How does one grieve or feel anything for places or people she felt she never knew in the first place? Thankfully, in the midst of this confusion, the girl could retreat to books or movies. She could hunker down for hours at the dining room table drawing Simpsons characters or fashion designs for her imaginary clothing label. Through television or literary characters and settings, she was free to sort out difficult emotions by watching the fictional struggle of others. She could be more precise in articulating difficult to put into words feelings through sweeping brushstrokes and vibrant color palettes. Sometimes using art tools was more effective in getting a point across. Books and art helped the girl build a rich, imaginative, empathetic inner world. Books showed her what was possible and inspired her to want to experience the process of creating fantastical stories, movies, plays, paintings, cartoons, anything to let her tell a story and invoke emotions. She discovered that sometimes the act of painting did more to soothe her nerves than complaining. Sometimes the act of writing did more to loosen her painting muscles than actual painting. And sometimes even mundane mechanical tasks of washing paintbrushes or searching reference photos of marigolds spurred sudden inspiration, as if it were an instant cure for a bad bout of writer's block. And sometimes, when faced with challenging times of collective civil unrest, a work of art could capture a crucial perspective and help give meaning and understanding to the circumstances at hand. As a result, the girl became fascinated by the question, what makes something or someone American? She majored in American Studies with a particular interest in U.S. social history and artistic cultural responses. Reading critical texts demonstrated how to articulate the precise nature of her personhood struggles. W.E.B. Du Bois called it double consciousness, that peculiar feeling of having two ways of seeing yourself. She learned that when things are made to be foreign, it is easier to detach experientially and emotionally, and things stay foreign when people refuse to make them familiar. After all, people don't feel responsible for things that are not associated with them in the same way they feel bonded to those who are. If people refuse to learn new, unfamiliar stories, they have no reason to care about things like injustice. The girl realized it was the reason she retreated into creative realms of books and art. Unlike the real world, this interior world had a shared reality. Through academia and the continued practice of painting and drawing in the studio, the girl regained her self-determination. She was American, through and through. After all, she considered herself a New Englander, with a New Hampshire accent, which is a unique combination of the Maine and Boston accents, so that she sounded like she was from California. She was culturally American because she grew up with 80s sitcoms and McDonald's and being obsessed with rolling the cuffs of her pants above her socks, as was the American fashion at the time. Nearly all her school field trips indoctrinated her with the quaint New England colonialism. And she would have an epiphany about her own implicit bias, having grown up benefiting by proxy her family's white privilege. She was sheltered by it until she entered the real world, the outside world. But she also got to see what was behind the scenes, an aspect of white privilege that people like her parents, well-meaning, hardworking, liberal white people, could never see. She saw how good, well-meaning people could still have bias, and that bias could be deep-seated, almost invisible. But this was a result from living in long-established social systems that had been perpetuated since the Civil War. The girl was relieved to have this aspect of the story. It deepened her understanding of what personhood is, for her, for everybody. Academia was not the perfect refuge or ally in addressing structural inequality, but it played a key role in enriching her work in the present day. After teaching and painting for many years, she started a career in children's book publishing as an illustrator. She wanted to put her art skills to use. She had revered books as a child, and she still considered them to be the ultimate platform to contribute to the historical and cultural narrative. As a maker of children's books, she could help make the picture books and the chapter books that she longed to read as a kid. She could help make fun and funny stories that featured diverse characters. And perhaps, most of all, she could model for her two biracial children that a career in the arts is possible with dedication and hard work, and that art can help with mustering and validating self-determination. To this day, the girl continues with art and continues with finding new creative processes, and therefore she finds new ways to continue to learn and continue to grow. The end.